to news.abc.net.au or the ABC News app.
The city has been in lockdown. Today, maternity hospitals and schools targeted in Russia's biggest attack on Ukraine since the invasion began.
South Africa launches a case at the United Nations top court, accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza.
Pressure mounts on the US Supreme Court to weigh in on Donald Trump's eligibility to run in next year's presidential election.
More intense storms on the way for Queensland and New South Wales as the East Coast cleans up after a week of severe weather.
Short. Could be the end of the Test match.
Pat Cummins shines as Australia beats Pakistan by 79 runs in the Boxing Day Test.
And the year of moon exploration. A record 12 lunar missions are planned for 2024. So what's everyone looking for?
Good morning. It's Saturday the 30th of December. I'm Gemma Veness.
And I'm Cornish, and you're watching Weekend Breakfast, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. Ukraine has been hit by what it's describing as Russia's largest air attack on the nation since the beginning of the full-scale invasion nearly 2 years ago. At least 30 civilians have been killed and more than 130 wounded after a wave of missiles and drones overwhelmed Ukraine's air defences.
Ukraine had been warning for weeks that Russia could be stockpiling missiles to launch a major attack on the energy system, like last winter. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa and Lviv have now come under attacks, with schools, residential buildings and a maternity ward all reportedly targeted.
This morning at 7 o'clock, the war came to us too. Straight to our wards, straight to our delivery rooms. We were waiting for the new year, new lives to come to our maternity hospital.
South Africa has asked the International Court of Justice for an urgent order declaring that Israel is in breach of its obligations under the Genocide Convention over its bombardment of Gaza. South Africa is a vocal critic of Israel's war in Gaza, vowing to suspend all diplomatic relations until a ceasefire is agreed. Israel has rejected South Africa's latest move, describing the court application as baseless.
In southern Gaza, the Israeli army has announced it is expanding its military operation against Hamas in Khan Yunis. The area was previously a known safe zone for those that fled northern Gaza in the early stages of the war. The Gazan Health Ministry says 187 people have been killed in the past 24 hours as Israeli forces continue to target the territory. Meanwhile, Israel and Hamas have rejected a peace proposal put forward by Egypt.
Several people, including 3 children, remain in hospital following a major car crash west of the Blue Mountains in New South Wales yesterday. 5 vehicles collided on the Great Western Highway near Lithgow around midday. 2 people died and 15 others were rushed to hospital. 1 person remains in a critical condition.
Parts of Australia are in for a very warm New Year's Eve, with hot and stormy conditions expected across much of the country. More intense storms are forecast for southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales as the East Coast continues to recover from a week of deadly weather. An extreme heatwave warning is also in place for parts of the Northern Territory and WA over the weekend.
Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, has scrapped a planned entry into the BRICS, set to join BRICS in 2024, which was envisaged as an alternative to the G7. In a letter to the leaders of Russia, China, India, Brazil and South Africa, the Argentinian president said decisions taken by the country's previous government had been revised.
Families and friends have paid tribute to South Korean actor Lee Sung-kyun in a private funeral in Seoul. The 48-year-old actor, known for his role in the film Parasite, was found dead after weeks of an intense police investigation into his alleged drug use. His death brought an outpouring of sympathy from the film industry and public, as well as questions over the public nature of the police probe.
Dozens of cancer patients in Lebanon have gathered to protest near the Prime Minister's office, demanding better access to medication. Lebanon has faced severe medicine shortages since 2019 due to the economic crisis, which has plunged 3/4 of the population into poverty, forced the closure of pharmacies and emigration of thousands of medical professionals.
The government does not support us. Sometimes the medicine is available and sometimes it is not, depending on what support we receive. The cost of treatment is very high. Social Security does not support us anymore, nor does the government.
And last week we kept our eye on Santa in his sleigh, but this week there's another white-haired figure taking the reins. Husky sledding has become a popular tourist attraction in Finland, where companies are now offering Husky tours. With only 3 hours of daylight a day in the winter months, Huskies are doing their runs back to back, a schedule almost as busy as Santa's.
And now to sport with Daniel Garb. And Daniel, Australia has secured the Boxing Day test.
That they have done. Good morning, Ruby. Good morning, Gemma. A little bit scary for Australia late yesterday, but they have clinched that Test Series win over Pakistan with a 79-run win late yesterday, inspired by the masterful Pat Cummins, of course. It didn't come without a fright, though, as Mohammad Rizwan and Salman Ali were chipping away at the Aussie lead. But when Rizwan was given out off the glove strapping via DRS, well, that changed things. Pakistan weren't happy with that decision. Their coach, Mohammad Hafiz, said technology is bringing a curse into the beautiful game of cricket. From there, though, the Aussies wrapped things up quickly and Cummins was superb. He took 5 for 49 to make it 10 wickets for the match. He passed 250 Test wickets in the process and said it's the best I've bowled for a little while after being named player of the match. Mitch Starc claimed 4 wickets as the Aussies secured another Test win. Pakistan are still without a Test victory in Australia since 1995. The series now moves to Sydney for the New Year's Test, which will be David Warner's Test farewell. In tennis, it's not been the start Australia wanted to the United Cup, going down 2-1 to Great Britain in Perth. The defeat started with Alex de Minaur losing in 3 sets to Cameron Norrie. After dropping the first set 6-4, the Demons struck back in the second to claim it 6-2 and was looking sharp. But the Brit world number 18 sent his country 1-0 up in the tie by claiming the third set in a tiebreaker. The Great Britain win was clinched by Katie Boulter, who accounted for Alia Tomljanovic without too much of a worry. 6-2, 6-4. The world number 56 ranked Boulter's win gave her team an unassailable 2-0 lead over the host nation in the first tie of Group C. Australia did restore some pride in the mixed doubles, with Storm Hunter and Matt Ebden defeating Boulter and Neil Skupski. And in the A-League last night, Sydney FC have recorded a crucial win to end 2023 over top of the table Wellington Phoenix. Veteran Ryan Grant put Sydney ahead, but the Phoenix fought back with a stunning team goal to draw level. The Sydney started to tire a bit, managing against his old club for the first time, though Ufuk Talay made some changes, and that helped the Sky Blues regain control of proceedings. Robert Mack and then Fabio sealing all 3 points for Sydney, who move up to 8th on the table. The Phoenix are still top. It was a double celebration as well. The women's team won 1-0 over Wellington as well. So double joy for Sydney FC, joy for the Australian cricket team. Busy day in sport. Plenty more coming up this morning.
Bringing us good news. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Dan.
Let's take a quick look at the markets now. And US stocks slipped on the final day of trading for the year. And the Aussie dollar is down slightly. It's buying 68.14 cents and 61.5 euro cents.
Thank you for your company on Weekend Breakfast, and thank you for your company,
Thank you,
Gemma.
Riz.
Happy New Year's Eve.
Oh, yeah, that's correct. Lovely to be with you on it.
Now let's start talking about gyms. Joining a gym and getting fit, they're pretty common New Year's resolutions. But what if you've reached middle age or you're a little bit older and you've never worked out before?
Yeah, it can be a bit daunting. It turns out, though, that you're never too old to lift. A little later this hour, we're looking at the health benefits of strength and resistance training for people in their 60s, 70s, 80s and beyond. And Ruby will be looking at how people can make that first step and as we say there, the benefits that they're going to get from that and see with that lifting at that age.
Lots of benefits to lifting in older age, yep.
Now let's check the weather in the capitals now. We've got some showers and a possible storm for Brisbane today. There's also showers expected for Sydney and Melbourne. Partly cloudy for Canberra. There's a chance of morning rain in Hobart. Adelaide will be cloudy and it'll be mostly sunny for Perth and Adelaide.
More now on our top story. Russia has launched its largest air attack on Ukrainian cities since its full-scale invasion began. Dozens of civilians have been killed and more than 130 wounded.
Europe correspondent Steve Kinane has the details.
The scale of this attack was unprecedented. In the west of Ukraine, Lviv was struck, also the capital, Kyiv. In eastern Ukraine, we saw Dnipro and the city of Kharkiv struck, also Odessa and Zaporizhia, where one of the deadliest attacks occurred in the south. Now, what we're hearing from the Ukrainian Air Force is that they've never seen so many simultaneous attacks from the air at once. Apparently, it was a combined number of 158 missiles and drones within a 24-hour period. We did get warnings heading up to winter that Ukrainian authorities believed that Russia was stockpiling missiles and that they would build them up and try and attack all at once Ukraine's energy infrastructure. That seems to be what has happened in this instance. But it's not just the energy infrastructure that has been hit. We've also seen schools, a maternity hospital, residential buildings, a shopping mall, all struck in this 24-hour period. We're also hearing some very interesting news out of Poland, where the Polish president has met with his security advisors to discuss what they claim is an instance where a Russian missile has entered Polish airspace for less than 3 minutes. So they had a big meeting about that, and the US president, Joe Biden, we're hearing from the White House, is closely monitoring that situation.
Well, pressure is mounting on the US Supreme Court to weigh in on Donald Trump's eligibility to stand in the 2024 presidential election, following Maine's decision to remove him from the primary ballot. North America correspondent Barbara Miller has been following developments from Washington and joins us now. Barbara, talk us through the significance of the decision in Maine.
Well, in some ways, the Maine decision is less significant than the decision in Colorado to strike Donald Trump from the primary ballot. And that's in the way it was made. Maine's decision was made by an official, the Secretary of State, a Democrat, and it can still be appealed through that state's courts. In Colorado, where the decision was made last week that Trump shouldn't be on the ballot, that's already gone through all the courts there. But what the decision in Maine does, it really adds to that sense that different states are making different calls on this crucial issue of whether Donald Trump's alleged participation in an insurrection bars him through an amendment in the Constitution from taking part in an election to be president of this country. And since the Maine decision, we've had a California Secretary of State decide not to strike Donald Trump from the ballot there. We've also had a couple of other states dismiss legal challenges, so look through the same type of evidence that Colorado's courts did and come to a different decision. And that's all really adding, as you say, to this pressure that this key matter really needs to be resolved by the US Supreme Court. And in fact, in the case of Colorado, both sides of the equation, Republicans and those who would seek to strike Donald Trump from the ballot, have asked the Supreme Court to take up the issue. Experts tell us if the court does, it's going to be an incredibly complex decision for it to make.
I think that the justices are going to be looking at the legal issues, but they're obviously going to be cognizant of the seriousness of removing a major candidate, in fact, the leading candidate for one of the parties, from the ballot. And so I think that that will weigh in, at least subconsciously, both on their decision of whether or not to take up the case on the merits now or punt it until later, as well as on the merits of the disqualification question as well.
And Barbara, you say that this is likely to be a complex decision. So what's the likely timeline of any decision that the Supreme Court may make?
Well, we know that the court can move quickly. Those of us who remember the year 2000 and the dispute between George Bush and Al Gore over who'd won the state of Florida in that presidential election, that's a case that the court resolved within a matter of a few days. But there's no mandated timeline for the court to even say whether it's taking up this case. The pressure, though, is really mounting because the elections, primaries and caucuses where each party decides who will be its presidential candidate. They begin in just over 2 weeks' time. The first of those is the Iowa caucus. And then by early March, you have what's known as Super Tuesday, when a whole bunch of states hold these elections. And after Super Tuesday, it's sometimes pretty clear who the candidate for each of the main parties will be. So a lot of pressure now on the court and for a quick decision, but we'll just have to see whether the court responds to that, and if they do, just how quickly they can decide whether Donald Trump is indeed eligible to run for the president in 2024.
Barbara Miller in Washington there.
For many people, the great Australian dream has meant a 3 or 4 bedroom home with a backyard in the suburbs.
But the dominance of these larger homes is worsening the rental crisis for some, as more and more of us turn to living alone.
2 recent rent rises are straining Tina's monthly budget to breaking point.
I don't buy anything that I don't need, obviously, but in the last week or so it can be a bit difficult to make what food's left stretch until payday.
The hobby artist longs to be closer to family by moving from Melbourne's Mornington Peninsula up the road to Frankston. But when she began looking, she found herself facing a growing mismatch between supply and demand.
I can see the smaller units that I could afford are very few and far between.
Large houses dominate Frankston, where just 1 in 5 homes has only 1 or 2 bedrooms. It's a problem strickening Melbourne's growth corridors, like Hume and Whittlesea, where those smaller houses make up just 1 in 10 homes, or Melton, just 1 in 20. Several councils are now calling for a better mix to prevent small or low-income households slipping further into housing stress.
It just makes it difficult for people to live locally and continue to live locally and have the support of their community around them.
Despite the dominance of larger homes, more and more of us are living alone. Single-person households will become the state's fastest-growing household type over the next 10 years or so, and that raises some big questions about where those people will live. Well-planned, higher-density living is an obvious solution to a long-gestating problem, but market forces leave it easier said than done.
Developers will deliver what the market obviously is asking for, and at the moment the market, that there's a mismatch between that and what the planning policy is calling for.
As does the endurance of the Australian dream. Jessie Thompson, ABC News, Melbourne.
Well, billions of people across the world are expected to go to the polls in 2024, with elections in Russia, Taiwan and India, just to name a few. But the big one, at a time when the future of democracy is being debated, is the United States, which could find itself being led once again by a man who never conceded defeat and has scores to settle.
I spoke earlier to Mark Bendai, Reuters Global Managing Editor for Politics, Economics and World News, and began by asking where democracy stands right now.
It's very interesting because there's a narrative, I wouldn't call it a consensus, but there's an overriding tone of coverage, and that is that democracy is on the backslide, it's on the back foot. And we've seen various things that have caught the headlines, apart from the United States and the whole row over the election deniers and what's going to happen there. We've seen elections, quite troubled elections, very recently. In fact, Serbia, we've had elections there that have there have been suspicions of vote rigging in those elections. We've got protests there. Also in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we've got protests as we're speaking, and there too there are allegations of vote rigging. We had elections. It was a big year actually this year for elections in Africa, but we had elections in Nigeria and also in Kenya. There too we had trouble at those elections. But interestingly, on the other hand, both in Nigeria and Kenya, despite the vociferous claims of vote rigging and cheating, those elections were broadly respected, and there are still proceedings and inquiries going on, but generally government continued in those two countries. We saw in Poland, which was very much under the microscope in the European Union for democratic values. In fact, the EU had withheld funding for Poland after some years on the Law and Justice Party. So there in Poland, we've seen a change of government. Donald Tusk has come in. He's looking at changing things in Poland. So it's interesting. I think the tenor of coverage is definitely that there is a wave of authoritarianism and even autocracy in the world. But when you look at it up close, some of it might be that, you know, people who lose will complain that there have been vote rigging. But generally, I think the real test is whether elections are seen as free and fair, and also that the result is respected. So I think it's a very, very live debate at the moment. And I think the consensus or the narrative is that definitely democracy is on the back foot.
And what could a re-elected President Trump mean for democracy, and why does it matter?
Big question. The moment I open my mouth, I'm going to get 1,000 emails from folks in the US. It's a really fraught topic. Obviously, if you just look at the facts and what Donald Trump says he will do if re-elected, one of the things he said he will do is that he will go and overhaul the Department of Justice. He will ask them to investigate prosecutors, which he says are out of control and radical. There's talk that he would reactivate something called Schedule F, which is a presidential decree, an executive decree, I should say, which would enable him to replace, in other words, fire, up to 50,000 career civil servants in the US. So these are the sorts of things that give people pause and, you know, concern about American democracy, US democracy. On the other hand, you have Trump supporters who would say that democracy is already broken, and these are echoes of Drain the Swamp. So there's nothing bigger really this year in terms of this debate than the US election.
What of the other elections will have a big influence on this debate over democracy?
I think India will be hard to go past. Look, it's interesting again, it's not so simple. Narendra Modi, he has been criticised definitely on human rights records, on treatment of minority Muslims in India. He is, however, very, very popular and has, as we've reported, launched quite an interesting campaign to attract Muslim votes. In the same way that, you know, the Democrats have been seen to be losing Hispanic and black votes to Donald Trump. So he swept 3 of the 4 state elections recently in India, the Narendra Modi's BJP party. So he's looking very, very strong, but it will be interesting in the character of the government and Indian democracy after this. He very much is about an economic agenda and about driving development. And India has been on really quite a rapid and quite stunning infrastructure development program. And that has actually drawn a lot of support across the political spectrum.
So, Mark, will democracy take a backward step in 2024?
Don't know. I don't know. I think what we'll see is hopefully a really active participation in the electoral process, because I think even though we're talking about potentially backsliding in democracy or democracy on the back foot, I think, you know, it's good to remember that over a third of the planet or countries representing over a third of the world's population will be going to the polls in 2024.
Mark Bendai, Reuters Global Managing Editor for Politics, Economics and World News. Thanks for joining us.
Time now to talk sport with Daniel Garb. And Dan, you're taking a closer look at the Australian cricket team's triumph over Pakistan.
That I am. Ben Cameron from ABC Sport Cricket has been good enough to join me. Benny, good morning to you. It was an exciting end to play on day 4. Australia got the job done in the second test, a 79-run win, but not without a scare. Pakistan, to say the least, were pretty plucky.
Oh, absolutely they were. I mean, they haven't won a test in Australia since 1995. They've lost their last 15 test matches played down under. And all of a sudden, late yesterday afternoon, it looked like Mohammad Rizwan might lead them to victory. Before that, it looked like Shan Masood, their new captain, and their former captain, Babar Azam, who has really a pretty poor record for as good a player as he is outside of Asia. They might get them there. And I think everyone was pretty excited by that. But once again, and I said this yesterday on News 24, it's become a little bit of a hackneyed cliche. Everyone uses it so much, but cometh the moment, Cummins the man. I mean, so often he does it for Australia. And right there, as you saw it, that was the controversial wicket. Mohammad Rizwan Did it hit the wristband on his glove? It was divisive. A lot of people had different opinions on it. I thought it probably did flick the wristband, but either way, he was given out, and Australia from that point on never really looked like losing, Dan.
Let's talk about Pat Cummins. I mean, he is the darling of Australian sport at the minute. 10 wickets in the Boxing Day Test. He passes 250 wickets in the process. Only Glenn McGrath, with that number of wickets or more, has a better bowling average. I mean, we are watching an all-time great, and he has been for some time, without any shadow of a doubt, at his peak right now, and he's the captain too. It's a great tale at the minute, isn't it?
It's unbelievable. I think we really need to start appreciating what we have in Pat Cummins. So of all the Australian bowlers that have taken 250 Test wickets, he has the best strike rate. So he takes wickets quicker than anybody else. So Warne, McGrath, all of them, he takes wickets quicker than them, of anyone who's taken over 250 for Australia in Test match cricket. He took 10 wickets in this Test match. It was the second time he's done that in Test cricket. It was an incredible performance from Pat Cummins, and his captaincy. He's dispelled all of the theories that you can't have a bowler, you can't have a fast bowler as captain. He's done it with aplomb. He barely missed a trick. He's clearly set a culture of, when he took over, there was a little bit of chortling about calm and collaborative, but that's exactly what they've been. And even yesterday, when things get a little tense and it looks like Pakistan might get the runs, they stay calm. Pat continues to bowl with incredible heart and vigour, and eventually they get it done. And that's what this team's been. They're World Test champions. They've won the 50-over World Cup. They had the drawn Ashes where they won the opening two tests and retained the Ashes. So I think we really need to look at what Pat's doing and appreciate what we've got while we've still got it.
Wonderful leader. We move on to Sydney next for the New Year's Test. Any changes likely to the Australian 11? And an extension to that, the replacement for David Warner. Who is it likely to be once he says farewell after the SCG Test?
Well, it seems like all of the bowlers, Dan, have got through this Test A-OK. We spoke to Josh Hazlewood after the match yesterday. He seemed to think that he'd be fine to play in the match in Sydney. So they didn't bowl quite as much as they may well have. They've obviously got a day off today when they were meant to have day 5. So that helps. Farewell for David Warner. It'll be an emotional week, and it'll be a divisive week. There are a lot of people in Australia who are still very upset with David Warner for what happened in South Africa. And there are a lot of people who appreciate how great a player he has been across all three formats. And that's inarguable. He has been a transcendent generational player across all three formats of cricket. So it will be a big week. Then we're looking at who replaces him. So the West Indies series starts mid-January, 2 tests. It's a soft start, if we're being brutally honest, for that new opener. I think it will be either one of Marcus Harris, Cameron Bancroft, and Matt Renshaw, or I think it should be. I think it's a specialist position. You need a specialist opening batter at the top of the order. I do think there's an eagerness to get Cameron Green into the side. So maybe they'll put the all-rounder to the top. I know they've got Mitch Marsh in the team at the moment, but I think he might go to the top, which I wouldn't like. But I think Harris should be the leader. So this is a guy who's toured with the team for a long period of time, has sort of been the next in line, scored 100 against Pakistan in the tour match recently. I think he deserves the right. And that's with the knowledge that, look, Cameron Bancroft has put a mountain of runs together. And Usman Khawaja is the same age as David Warner. They were junior cricket teammates. They played together. I don't think he's long for Test cricket. And I think Cameron Bancroft or Matt Renshaw will likely come in, and that will be the new generation opening pair, Bancroft and Harris, for the time being, once Warner and Khawaja both move on.
It'll be a fascinating watch. Ben Cameron from ABC Sport Cricket, thanks so much.
Anytime, Garby. Good to speak.
You too. We move to Sydney now. Australia's wrapped up the series against Pakistan.
Dan, thank you.
Thank you.
Looking around the country, a mostly sunny and warm day for Queensland, except for a storm over the southeast. To New South Wales and the ACT, showers easing in the northeast and mostly sunny elsewhere. For Victoria, a clearing shower in the southwest, mostly cloudy in the southeast and mostly sunny in the north. To Tasmania, showers and strong winds in the southwest, clearing rain in the southeast and mostly cloudy in the north. Mostly sunny across South Australia with strong winds in the north. For Perth, mostly cloudy in the west, windy and warm in the south and a mostly sunny day for the northeast. A mostly sunny day for the NT with very warm and hot temperatures. And looking ahead to tomorrow's forecast for the capital cities, a possible shower for Brisbane. It'll be mostly cloudy for Sydney, mostly sunny for Canberra, Melbourne and Hobart, partly cloudy for Adelaide and Darwin, and a sunny day for Perth.
Recapping the top stories on Weekend Breakfast now, at least 30 civilians have been killed and more than 130 wounded in what Ukraine is calling Russia's largest air attack since the full-scale invasion nearly 2 years ago. Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Odessa and Lviv came under attack from dozens of missiles and drones, with a maternity ward, schools and residential buildings reportedly targeted.
South Africa has launched a case accusing Israel of genocide at the United Nations top court. The nation has asked the International Court of Justice for an urgent order declaring Israel is in breach of its obligations under the Genocide Convention over its ongoing bombardment of Gaza. The case also asked the court to issue an interim order for Israel to immediately halt its military operation.
More intense storms are forecast for southeast Queensland and New South Wales as the east coast continues to recover from a week of deadly weather. An extreme heat wave warning is also in place for parts of the Northern Territory and WA over the weekend.
And Australia is aiming to make a clean sweep of the Test series against Pakistan after beating the tourists by 79 runs at the MCG. Captain Pat Cummins' 5-wicket haul in the second innings led the home side to victory to retain the Benno Kadir Trophy.
And time to take a look now at what's making headlines around the Asia-Pacific region. Starting with the Times of India, where police are working to find the masterminds behind a human smuggling network, which came to light when French authorities halted a plane load of passengers after an anonymous tip-off.
In the South China Morning Post, Beijing says a Philippines plan to install a permanent facility in the South China Sea is provocative and would infringe on China's sovereignty, warning it would respond resolutely.
The Fiji Times reports that a resounding no has been the feedback from those consulted on a $2 billion casino project proposed by an investment group from China, but the government is still yet to make a decision.
And the New Zealand Herald is reporting that just about every beach in Auckland is deemed unsafe for swimming today. That's after heavy rain washed sewage into the ocean.
Let's get more now on the situation in Ukraine, where Russia has launched that massive aerial attack, killing dozens of people in a wave of deadly explosions.
It is, and always has been, the whole of Ukraine which is under attack. Kyiv is still Moscow's biggest prize. Air defences have improved here, but this attack proved too much.
I was woken up at 7:30 by a horrible sound. It was so frightening. The missile was flying and everything was buzzing, so noisy.
You are left in no doubt that this was a direct missile strike. The scale of the damage, the size of the blast zone, the heat caused. You're more used to seeing damage caused from falling debris when a missile is intercepted, but this reflects the scale of this Russian attack. And scenes like this are being replicated right across Ukraine. A lucky escape in Kharkiv in the northeast. This city is familiar with missile strikes, but not 20 in a single morning. A shopping centre in Dnipro in the east, as well as a maternity hospital, were hit. It didn't stop there. This is the port city of Odessa in the south, where a residential block was struck. Zaporizhia wasn't spared either, where at least 8 were killed. Even Lviv in the west, which sometimes feels far from this invasion, wasn't immune this time. All military targets were hit, as far as Russia's defense ministry was concerned. Ukraine's Air Force says it had never seen so many missiles in one attack. In a war where Moscow routinely strikes cities it can't occupy, that is saying something. It's been a day in Kyiv which has reminded you of the early days of the invasion, when it was under much more regular attacks. Russia is trying to damage Ukrainian morale. President Zelensky, meanwhile, has been trying to boost Ukraine's hopes, if you like, by visiting one of the most hostile parts of the front line today, the eastern city of Avdiivka. Now, with future Western help getting bogged down in political disagreement, Ukraine is telling the West, we're not just fighting for us, but you as well. As Russia won't stop here.
Well, 2024 is shaping up to be a huge year for space exploration. In particular, moon landings, with a record 12 lunar missions planned for the coming year.
Space exploration costs are coming down and the interest is heating up. And we're questioning now who is headed into space and what exactly are they looking for. Alex Gilbert is a PhD candidate in space resources at the Colorado School of Mines, and he joins us now. Alex, we've got 3 of these missions planned for next month alone. One of them is Japan's SLIM mission, and that is a significant step for the country, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So what we've seen in the last 5 years is a lot of development heading towards the moon. And Japan right now is on track to be the 5th country to successfully soft land on the moon. Now, the 4th one was India, which was just last year, underscoring the increasing pace of lunar activity. Otherwise, it's the United States, Russia, and China. What's happened because the cost of space exploration has gone down so much over the last 10 years, many new countries and companies can now participate in space exploration and in lunar exploration. And so there are, in addition to just countries like Japan exploring, we're actually seeing a lot of private activity. Most of the missions next year have some private element, whether they're a commercial company serving a government agency or a purely commercial mission.
Yeah, it really opens this market up for space exploration, as you've said there. Many of the missions for next year, they're related to the search for water. Can you tell us about the significance of that and also what other resources are being looked at?
Yes, over the last 15 to 20 years, we have discovered that there are potentially large sources of water on the lunar south and north poles in areas that we call permanently shadowed regions, areas that don't see the sun. Now, this is really exciting because the moon has a much lower gravity than Earth, and so if we can access water there, we can then send it to other places in space and refuel spacecraft. So in addition to be able to send things to orbit much cheaper, we might be able to refuel them, and that could greatly increase the size of the space economy. So a lot of these missions are trying to ascertain whether our remote observational data and our impactor data is actually accurate and that there are both large and accessible resources of water. But there's other things that we're looking for as well. One thing that we know is there is oxygen in the lunar regolith. And some of these missions are the precursors to be able to access that oxygen, which can also be used to help support lunar refueling architectures.
There are big bragging rights when it comes to lunar exploration. Can you tell us what do the world's superpowers have planned in the near future?
So one of the major drivers of a lot of this interest is renewed geopolitical competition. And there really are 2 blocks emerging right now. There's the United States-led Artemis Accords, which at this point is more than 30 countries have agreed to a shared approach to lunar exploration. This is in addition to the U.S. Artemis program to return humans to the moon. We also have the Chinese-led Air National Lunar Research Station, which is also looking to develop a lunar exploration architecture by the early 2030s. Now, China next year is actually looking to do a second sample return mission. They are targeting the first ever sample return from the South Pole. They're actually targeting the far side of the moon for that, which is the unique capability that China has by using relay satellites. Meanwhile, the United States has a flagship mission, which is looking at the end of 2024, could slip a little bit, but that's Artemis 2, and that is the crewed test of the future human landing system. We're going to be sending out the Orion spacecraft, and that is with 4 astronauts. It's the first time that astronauts will leave low Earth orbit since the Apollo era, so over 50 years.
If a lot of these landings are successful, and you can give us your thoughts on that, but you say that this coming year will mark the beginning of a new era. What do you mean by that?
So landing on the moon is the first stepping stone to the potential development of the moon as part of our economic sphere. Landing right now is very challenging because there is no supporting infrastructure. Spacecraft must operate somewhat autonomously. They need to navigate on their own. They need to then land. So we need to figure out how to do that successfully. But once we do that, we can start setting up infrastructures and systems, things that can communicate with each other. And I think that this is a major inflection point or step change, because right now we're about 12 missions scheduled for this year. The only other year that we've had that many missions scheduled was 1969 at the actual height of the space race. This number and this cadence is just showing how much interest is happening. And if even a handful of these missions are successful, especially some of the private missions showing the ability for private companies to land on the moon, it could lead to a massive increase in investment in lunar science, exploration, and development.
Okay, so what are you most excited about when it comes to moon activity next year?
So I'm most excited for the Viper rover, which is going to the lunar South Pole. It's a rover that's designed to skirt into those permanently shrouded regions I was telling you about earlier to actually look for ice itself. That mission has been in development for quite a few years now. But if that mission successfully finds water, if it shows that our estimates and our predictions are accurate, that is the thing that will start leading to a significant increase in activity and will allow us to start targeting with a much better idea of where precisely this water is. What does it look like? How is it bound within the regolith? And then how do we extract it using space resource technologies?
Alex Gilbert, PhD candidate in space resources at the Colorado School of Mines. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We've all heard the adage, healthy body, healthy mind, and in recent years, science has demonstrated to us just how close the link can be. The bacteria living in our gut, for instance, have been shown to contribute to mental health and mental illness.
Now a new study on mice seems to suggest our microbiome may influence how socially anxious we are. Professor John Cryan from University College Cork co-authored the new research, and he joins us now. John, thank you so much for your time. Firstly, your findings relate to the condition social anxiety disorder. Can you tell us a bit about what that is, how serious it is, and how prevalent it is?
Yeah, social anxiety disorder is actually very common. Estimates are about 7% in any 12 months in Australia and elsewhere, about 11% lifetime incidence. And what we're talking about with social anxiety disorder, it's not just shyness or introversion. This is a syndrome where people have a very much a deep fear of being judged, of being in social environments. It really impacts their everyday lives and how they navigate their workplace and social situations. And current treatments are psychological treatments or medication, but there is a large unmet medical need to try and come up with solutions that would be better.
Yeah, and so to show a link between our gut bacteria and this disorder, you set out to alter the gut bacteria of mice. Talk us through the process that you went through.
Yeah, so for 15 years or more, our group here in APC Microbiome Ireland and many groups around the world, including many groups in Australia, have been linking what's going on in our gut with what's going on in our brain. And a lot of the studies do rely on having mouse models to be able to tease that apart. But what we need to really do in the field is move away from just correlation towards causation. So we showed work from psychiatrists Mary Butler and Ted Dinan showed last year that the microbiome in individuals with social anxiety disorder is different than those in healthy controls. But what we wanted to do in this study was, well, what if we took them microbes and gave them to animals, and what would we see? And one of the things that we saw was a very specific change in behaviors related to social fear. So the animals, when they went in contact with another mouse, and mice are very social, so when they're in contact with other mice, they enjoy this. However, we give them a small, mild foot shock, and therefore they learn not to go near that mouse. However, over time, they extinguish this over repeated exposures. And what we found was in the mice that had been given microbes from patients with social anxiety disorder, they weren't able to, they continued to have fear of this normal mouse, even though there was nothing aberrant with it. So this was really one of our first discoveries to really causally link that there's something in the microbiome that is shaping social circuits in the brain that is underpinning social anxiety disorder. And that is, for us, that's a really good starting point now to try and understand the mechanisms and then perhaps to develop therapeutic options that might be useful for patients.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like we're seeing more and more research showing this link between our gut bacteria and our brains. So were you surprised by these results, or did they seem kind of like they would make sense given the other research that's out there?
Yeah, no, what was surprising here was the specificity, because most of the analysis we did initially was negative, and we found very little changes in the totality. But when we started looking specifically at social fear, related behaviors and brain areas, that's when we got a real eureka moment here. So it was gratifying to see that there's something, it builds on all of our work to show that there's something about the social brain in particular that makes it sensitive to microbial signals. And this has also ramifications, as you allude to, beyond just social anxiety disorder, but to other disorders with sociability at the heart of them, whether it's related to autism or the social deficits in schizophrenia.
And so what do we take from this then? I mean, obviously it's important to look after our gut flora. Is this something that we can do day to day through the things that we eat, for instance?
Absolutely. We showed in a study last year that by really ramping up fermented foods and fibre in the diet, you could really have a beneficial effect in healthy volunteers in terms of how they deal with stress. Work from Deakin University, from Felice Jacka, has shown, really having a modified Mediterranean diet that's really good for your microbes lowers depression levels. So we're beginning to see that diet approaches might be a way here. However, I will caution that we need to do these studies in this specific population, people with social anxiety disorder.
Professor John Crine from University College Cork, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ruby.
Well, ice baths are often used by sports professionals to fast-track muscle recovery, but their popularity among us normal, non-sports people is taking off as a way to cool down and chill out. And as this next story explains, they may have further benefits too.
After a long run in the Darwin heat, what could be better than an icy cold dip?
I was very cold and I had to get out as quickly as possible.
My hands are starting to really hurt, but I feel really calm.
It feels so much better. I need to do this every week.
While it may not be for everyone, ice baths not only provide relief from wet season heat, but also contribute to physical and mental wellness.
Definitely Darwin's hot enough as it is, so we're in mango madness at the moment. Everyone wants to be a little bit colder, so yeah, it was a no-brainer doing something around the cold.
Joe runs weekly ice bath sessions, which incorporate breathwork and mobility to form an all-round recovery experience.
So we've literally just been starting out and we've got sold-out classes already, so it's just exploded into the market.
It seems like ice baths are getting even more popular in the Darwin area, with businesses popping up to offer both public and private sessions. So I think it's time for me to see what all the hype is about.
Oh, that's cold. That's cold.
Sinking into the 1 degree water, I had an immediate panic reaction. I was struggling to stop hyperventilating, and the almost freezing water felt like needles on the skin. But that feeling soon subsided. Well, I've only been in the ice bath for about 2 or 3 minutes, but I can already feel myself starting to relax. My breathing's slowed down, there's a little bit of tingling in my extremities, which is running all the way up the back of my neck to even my ears. And it's that relaxed state of being which Councillor Peter Burke strives to achieve, both for himself and his clients.
I'm a better man, I'm a better father, I'm a better partner, I'm a better friend. Everything is enriched from that space.
Working in residential rehabilitation and trauma counselling, Pete has found ice baths can empower his clients and put them in a better space to process their own trauma.
The ice bath is just a conduit, it's just a pathway. The intent is that we raise people's awareness and consciousness about their own experience, see where their edges of fear sit, and have them sit and face those in an empowered way.
So whether it's for mental wellness or just to cool down, now's the time to dive into the ice bath experience. Daniel Litchens, ABC News.
Oh, Dan's a bit brave jumping into that ice bath.
He's in Darwin though. I'll point that out, Dan, if you're watching.
So he can hop out. He's in a sauna already.
Yeah, but I mean, the ice bar, they really are taking off. They, you know, as the story said, they have been the domain of sports stars and hopping in that cold water. But a lot of people finding the benefits of it and just saying the.
Well, he was saying, one of those men was saying that it made him a better man. I mean, if that's not selling it, I don't know what would.
Can't really hurt to hop in a pool full of ice there for a few minutes and get those benefits.
I don't think I could do it. Just warm weather. I'm all about the warm weather. Well, sticking with the fitness theme now, it's a well-known fact that we lose muscle mass as we age, and after the age of 60, that loss can lead to an increased risk of falls, fractures, and lots of different chronic conditions. It's also why resistance training and lifting weights is crucial to our health and well-being as we age. But weightlifting is not often something we associate with older people, Gemma.
That's right, and our next guest has been challenging that notion at his gym in Daylesford, Victoria. Dean Morby is the head coach at Stronger Longer. He's providing targeted programs for people aged in their 50s to their 80s and beyond. And Dean joins us now. Dean, welcome to Weekend Breakfast. Now, I firstly want to start off, I want to hear some of your favourite transformations that you've seen by people turning up, maybe not believing in their potential and you showing that to them.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. One of my favourite transformations was, I guess, a lady in her late 60s who walked into the studio, had a look around and left, and she didn't want to come back. She didn't come back, and she didn't come back for 2 months. And she then gradually becomes stronger and got her head around what was happening. Her life completely transformed. She actually became very, very powerful. She became very well. She became she took up powerlifting then as a sport. Become Australian champion, then she become a coach. So in her 70s. So I think that was quite a stunning transformation, particularly around mindset.
That is an amazing story. Now, I'm sure we've got many viewers interested at this point. What brings people to your gym, for example, even if they turn up and go away for 2 months before returning?
Yeah, well, shows like this brings people to the gym, and really, you know, ABC and SBS over the last 7 or 8 years have really been banging on about this. So people watching a program like this themselves, or often, and sometimes more often, their children watching it and saying, hey, mum or dad, I think you really got to get into this and check this out. So it's generally from a referral, it's generally from watching a program, as I said, similar to this. Once people are in the studio, they're quite excited. They'll start telling their friends, their partners, and so on. So it goes from really that word of mouth, and I guess breaking down the different preconceived notions of strength training, which I really do feel they have been broken down a lot over this last decade.
Yeah, and I think most of us get that, you know, exercise is good for you, strength training is, that muscle mass, but what is it about the training that you offer that has such a positive effect on many areas?
Well, a really good question. Strength training and strength itself is one of the amazing gifts that we're given as human beings. We can be, we looked at a study just recently that's come out for people that have started training in their 70s and 80s, and it had a substantial change in their muscle growth, substantial change in their strength levels, and then how that translated to mobility and so on. So the thing with it, and lack of falls and so on. So the thing with strength training is that you can really get the power and vitality back into your life. Now, there's also, that seems to be correlated for a survival rate from illness, from all illness, from a perspective of favourable outcomes in treatments in illness and degenerative illnesses and so on. It's like the strength builds back vitality, and you can, I like to say, a strength mountain, you can start climbing a strength mountain when you're really young, 14, 15, and you get quite powerful. And then that you can keep atop of that mountain for, your entire life. But if you don't start to climb that strength mountain in your 60s and 70s, you'll still get very, very close to as strong as you could have ever been. And I find that stunning, and I find that that's really motivating for people because, by the time they're 60 and 70, they in a lot of ways, they're just used to things breaking down or running down. They're not used to saying, heavens, now I'm stronger than I've ever been. When I come at 65, I could, for instance, bench press 50 kilos. Now I'm 68 and I can bench press 75 kilos. There's a really clear progress, and there's a real sense of achievement. And it's also really relatable. They can talk about that to their kids and their grandkids and so on. And, a favorite story I had was an 80-year-old lady whose 18-year-old son goes, "Nan, what do you bench press? What do you deadlift?" So it's very, very relatable. And, it's just available. It's one of the things that once those barriers are broken down, you can enter into a new life of function, a new life of power, a new life of vitality. And it's simple. A couple of sessions a week, an hour, 2 sessions a week. You don't have to become a gym junkie.
Yeah, so Dean, I'm sure you're getting a lot of people interested in this at the moment, but what would your message be to someone watching who is interested but still thinks that this is beyond them?
Yeah, well, obviously go into a studio and suss it out, and things should be taken really slowly. You're not at school. You're not given an oboe and say, "Hey, next week you're going to be playing for the MSO." It might take you 2 months to blow a note out of the thing. So everything has to be broken down into pieces that are achievable, that feel safe, and that encourage that further progress. So start to meet with people in your community, in the community centres, in gyms, and so on, and see if you can develop those relationships. If you feel things are being pushed beyond what you think that you can do at that time and it feels unsafe, then back it back right down, or maybe talk to some other different people. The thing with it is that you should really be working with people exactly where they are, where they come in, from where they are in their mind when they come in, and just developing a relationship and creating a new journey where you go step by step, where you go from someone that knows that they need to be stronger, knows that they're becoming frail, know that their health could go well with getting stronger, building muscle mass, and then taking it in persistent bite-sized pieces that allow for that transformation. And the big thing, perseverance over time wins. It's a great attribute,
Dean Morby, head coach at Stronger Longer, thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much.
That's my New Year's resolution, Gemma, to begin climbing my strength mountain.
That sounds like it, Ruby.
Time now to talk sport again with Daniel Garb. Dan, let's talk a bit more about Pat Cummins. He is the darling of Australian sport at the minute, but what about his ranking? Where does he rank in terms of the great fast bowlers of all time?
He's doing amazing things at the moment. Wasn't that an interesting story? I'm just imagining my grandmother asking me what I deadlift. That would take me by surprise. Pat Cummins doesn't need to lift at the moment. He's absolutely flying the Australian captain. They say the Australian captain is the second most important position in Australia after the Prime Minister. Not sure that's the case at the moment, but my goodness, he is elevating the role. His effort with the ball is just unbelievable right now. 10 wickets in the Boxing Day test. He's past 250. He is clean cut, he's chiselled, and he is the darling of the sporting nation at the moment.
Thanks, Dan. More to come on Weekend Breakfast. Stay with us.
Remember your ABCs this summer.
Action plan. Start preparing now.
Be safe. Visit our emergency